Okay, so hello again. Thank you for joining us to the ISWP Product Quality and Reliability Committee. This is our first meeting of the year, and I know we have a little bit less of attendees today, but I think it's still worth to go and do like a round of quick introductions, just so we know everyone. And I want to start with Dr. Perman today.
I feel like I know everyone. I'm known. I'm John Perlman. I'm the department chair at the Department of Rehab Science and Technology here at Pitt. A lot of my career has been, working on product evaluation for specifically primarily wheelchairs, and supported the standards work and supported helped to lead ISWP, especially on the product side, and helping to promote higher quality wheelchairs globally.
Thank you. Can we continue with Eric? I know you were recently interviewed. I watched that video.
I just came in. We're doing a quick introduction.
Yeah.
All right. So my name is Eric Kondo. I'm been a wheelchair user from spinal cord injury since 1984. I've been pretty much involved in a lot of wheelchair-related activities, recreations. I've been recently been modifying equipment, making both wooden and plastic wheelchairs. So I have a deep interest in wheelchairs and wheelchair mobility, and that's why I'm here.
Thank you, Eric. Can we continue with Matt?
Yeah, Matthew McPherson. I actually have a presentation at the end that will go a little bit more into my background, and I'll explain a little bit more about what I'm doing. But I'm with the DeMarc Group, was an organization that I started within standards for technicians and training of technicians in wheelchair repair.
Thank you. Can we go with Jim?
Hello, yeah, I'm Jim Watson. I'm from Cranfield Impact Centre in the UK, and we're a test house performing wheelchair crash tests across many different standards. Okay.
Thanks, Jim. Nice to see you again. Alex?
Thanks, Stephanie. Hi, everyone. I'm Alex Kamadu. I'm the Executive Director of ISWP. I'm an OT by background and have spent many years as a seating therapist and wheelchair service manager. Most of that time was spent in the UK, but I currently live in Johannesburg in South Africa, and glad to see all of you and some new faces as well. Thanks.
Thank you. Kiyaki, do you want to go next? Okay,
Yes, thank you. It took me a second to get to the mute button. I'm Kiyoki. I'm co-founder of Participant Assisted Products. We make products and try to make things that are appropriate for the environments and daily life of people that live in low and middle income countries.
Thank you. Peter Axelson, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, this is Peter Axelson in the United States with the Wheelchair Test Lab at Beneficial Designs in Minden, Nevada.
Thank you. Chris Rushman, do you want to introduce yourself, please?
Yeah, thank you. So I'm Chris Rushman from Motivation Charitable Trust, and we've been designing wheelchairs for 25 years in for less resource settings, from everyday products, sports products. I'm currently the sort of product development manager there, and we also develop training, and very interested about the sort of product quality and the sort of maintenance and repair training aspects of wheelchair services.
Thank you. Eric Wunderlich. Sorry if I'm mispronouncing your last name.
Nope, that's good. Thanks. So I'm with Larry St. Charities, and we kind of have a wheelchair program where we provide wheelchairs and training in low and middle income countries around the world.
Thank you. Bill Emmer.
Hello, everyone. I'm Bill Ammer. I'm the owner of Ammer Consulting. I'm a wheelchair and assistive technology test lab here in the United States, just outside of Pittsburgh. I am the chairman of the United States RESNA Wheelchair Standards Committee. I'm also the convener of WG1, the ISO Wheelchair Standards Committee, and I sit on a few other ones. It's nice to be here. Thank you.
Thanks, Bill. Shauna?
Hi, everybody. Yeah, I suppose I'm primarily the mother of a daughter with severe spastic CP. And then I have been designing, manufacturing assistive devices for use in rural and less urban areas for the past 35 years.
Thanks, Shauna. Kara?
Hi, everyone. I'm Kara Copland, calling you from St. Louis, Missouri, in the middle of the U.S. I work for Permobil, the international manual and power wheelchair manufacturer and manufacturer of seating and positioning devices. My background is in engineering. My role is Director of Regulatory Science. I chair the Wheelchair Seating Committee in the U.S. through ANSI RESNA, and I'm an expert in the ISO and SEN standards committees as well.
Thank you, Kara. And last but not least, Ben?
Hi, my name is Ben Hubbard. I work for Peter Axelson. I'm the graphic designer at Beneficial Designs and will be assisting him today with his presentation.
Awesome, thank you. Well, I don't think I'm missing anybody, but please let me know if I'm missing one person or
Yeah,
two.
Steph, I just wanted to let you know that Dean is running a little bit late and he'll be joining us. Dean is one of the engineers in our in ShoneEquip Social Enterprise, which is the organization that designs and produces and sells pediatric seating and posture support equipment across Southern Africa. So he will be joining us. He's busy in the final stages of registering our wheelchair test laboratory. So he's particularly interested in this group and has been very active in it.
Thank you, Shauna. Okay, so now we're gonna go really quick to the agenda. We're gonna have a few updates from Alex. Then we're going to talk with Peter Axelson and Ben about the air travel. We have already completed 2 parts, but there's this last one more section where they're going to introduce everything else that we didn't get to hear before. And finally, we're also going to hear from Matt about the technical and maintenance training. Before we go into this, I do want to mention our next meeting is going to be on June 12th, 2024 at the same time. And I also wanted to share with the group that you may remember on our last meeting, we were looking for volunteers so that we could take a look at the terms of references. We also have met 1 or 2 times now, actually, with about 4 or 5 people who were able to give us some great ideas and feedback. We're going to meet maybe 1 or 2 more times to go into some action tasks to move forward. But basically, this is just going to help find a way or how this group is going to move forward in certain areas of interest. Okay. And Alex, I think with that, it's all yours. Alex, just in case we're looking at the presentation notes. Oh, thanks. I think you're muted.
Oh, sorry. Sorry about that. That's what happens when you carry on working till late in the evening. So once again, thank you everyone for your time. I'm always so enamored by the amount of people who attend this group and such a good representation. It has been a really busy time for ISWP. As many of you know, we transitioned from being under the University of Pittsburgh last year. And so much of 2023 was about consolidation, developing the governance structures for ISWP, building a team, onboarding new staff, and just looking forward and visioning what the new ISWP might look like. And next year is actually 10 years that ISWP will be in existence. So there's a lot of plans around what that celebration and the vision for ISWP might look like moving forward. One of the things that has been keeping us quite busy is the elections of the slate of candidates for the new board. As many of you know, we have a founding board of directors, a 13-member international founding board of directors. And as part of the transition, we've had to bring on board a new board of directors in line with the new bylaws that we have. So the Governance and Nominating Committee, which is a small subset of the founding committee, was given the task to identify candidates. So we put out a call for nominations, and we had quite a good response. We had 31 candidates that actually applied to be on the slate of candidates. And so our Governance and Nominating Committee had quite a task on their hands. So we developed a framework in order to be able to identify the right mix, the good representation for the new organization as we move forward. I'm delighted to say we have just finalized what we call a slate of candidates, so 15 board members that will now be voted on by our members who belong to ISWP. And then the results of the vote will be ratified at the AGM, which we have scheduled for the 30th of April. This is our inaugural AGM. It's also our first elections. It's a lot of firsts for ISWP. So there's a lot of lessons learned and a lot of lessons that we will learn as we go forward. But all things considered, we are tracking all the activities and things are moving forward according to plan. We've managed to secure Anthony Dutine as a keynote speaker for the AGM on the 30th of April, and he's going to set the scene for the rehabilitation landscape and what it means for assistive technology as we move forward with Rehab 2030. And Anthony is the WHO technical lead that's working under Alakos. And yeah, that's just all moving fairly swiftly. And a lot of planning goes into hosting an AGM and hosting the elections, particularly online. So you will, as members, be receiving many of the communications that are coming out. And I do apologize. There is a lot that we need to get out to members at the moment. So it might feel like there's a lot of communications coming out, but the content is very relevant to everyone. I'm also super delighted to announce, or you will have seen that we have launched our new website. This website is now a refreshed and more current look and feel. And earlier last year or late last year, we had quite an extensive exercise looking at a strategic brand review, looking at our logo and our color scheme. So you will see from our presentations, the look and feel has changed, the color scheme, and the logo itself is a much more current and up-to-date logo. So it was quite a process to be able to get to that. And now the website has been treated with the new color scheme, with the new logo. We've also just launched phase 1, and by the 15th of April, we'll be launching phase 2 of the website that actually introduces the learning management system that gives people access to all the online content and some of the translated versions of the tests and things like that we have on the previous website. So if you haven't taken a look at it, I'll drop the link to the new website on this chat after I present, and you can take a look, and we'd be grateful for any feedback around that as well. As part of the transition, we have been tasked with becoming less reliant on grant funding. So we are looking at other income revenue streams. So you will see on the new website that we've introduced membership benefits and structured benefit fees in line with the benefits that one would. So for example, students could sign up for free and they would get access to a limited number of benefits. Same for organizations or individuals. But what we've decided to do as an opening, a launch of the membership benefits and fees, anybody who registers and current members will all get free membership up until the end of this year. And the fees that we've created are very nominal, but they do help with the sustainability of the organization as we move forward into this new landscape into this new landscape. I'm also very excited because as ISWP is changing, change is never easy, as we all know, but we are also growing our team. We've been very blessed in the past with some very experienced and talented staff members that we no longer have access to, but we are building our team, and we've recently brought on Liz Botha, who is our association coordinator, and she provides secretariat function to ISWP and some of the committees. And just this week, we concluded our interviews for a program manager with a specific focus on advocacy and resource mobilization. And we are just in negotiation with the successful candidate. So we'll be making that announcement very soon. And we are very, very lucky because we've managed to secure someone with a lot of extensive experience in the sector, but also in the P&O sector, and very well connected in our entire network. And I do believe that she will add a much value to ISWP as we move forward. In terms of training and certification, we've been moving quite swiftly with this as well. We've managed to secure 119 certifications in the Ukraine. This is working with the WHO Ukraine office, who has brought on board some consultants to do some training related to the ISWP training. So we formed a partnership and have a small contract with the WHO in Ukraine to provide the certification for individuals who do the basic and the intermediate hybrid training. I'm pleased to see Shauna's on this call as well. We recently did a joint venture effort responding to a UNICEF tender to provide intermediate training in Zimbabwe. And we were successful in this approach. And so we are just in contract negotiations with UNICEF Zimbabwe. And it's kind of the model that we want to build moving forward, where ISWP will be responsible for certain trainings. And of course, we've got the online training that we spent a lot of effort and investment in developing. So we will continue to push this forward, but the partnership working with trainers in various countries is also a very attractive model to scale up both training and certification globally. Also on the training, we are working with the ISPO coordinators around the Global Educator Meeting in October in Stockholm. And we've got some work to do around some presentations and a track around there. We're also in discussion with ISPO around World Congress that will take place next year. And we would like to host a wheelchair track within that Congress so that we can actually try and attract more people to ISPO related to wheelchair and seating as well. Finally, we all know that the WHO, together with ISPO and ISWP, launched the wheelchair provision guidelines, which now has a 4-step process. And we need to align the wheelchair educators package, which is a tool for educators who want to increase wheelchair content into their curricula. And so we've managed to secure an individual who was heavily involved in the development of the wheelchair educators package by the name of Sarah Monero, who many of you know. And she will be helping us to do that alignment of currently in the wheelchair educators packages. It still refers to the 8 steps for the 2008 wheelchair guidelines. And so we need to now do that alignment piece of work. So Sarah Monero is going to be helping us on doing that. There's all sorts of other things that are going on in the background, but I thought that these were the most important things that I wanted to elaborate today. So over to you, Stephanie. And I don't know if there's any questions from the floor as well.
Thank you, Alex. Peter, if you want to share your screen, feel free to do so.
Okay, I think Ben's gonna share this, bring up the slides. So, I'm not sure what everybody's most interested in hearing about, because there's certainly a lot of other things that we could talk about, and the fourth thing might be actually the fact that IATA, what the status is with the IATA, the International Air Travel Association. But I thought I'd just show you a couple of other things that we've been working on with regard to air travel. So first we'll look at the drive pad. And so, as you all are aware, the issue is that most powered wheelchairs are too tall to go into Boeing style aircraft, where the baggage door is only providing an opening of 33 inches tall. So here you can see visually the problem that occurs there. And so what ends up happening is that some wheelchairs end up being tilted to load in sideways to aircraft to deal with short height baggage doors to get in, and they end up being on their side either during the loading process or actually in the travel process in the aircraft. And as a result, some of the damages that we've seen are drive wheels breaking off of powered wheelchairs, and we're making an assumption that this is the cause of this problem. So if we move forward again, so what you can see happens when you put a powered wheelchair on its side is the drive wheel gets loaded at the edge of the wheel, and so it puts a twisting torque motion on the trying to bend the wheel, and you can imagine if some turbulence or dropping that the wheelchair, you can imagine how the wheel and why the wheel would fracture and break off of the powered wheelchair, especially with the weight of most powered wheelchairs. So if you go ahead, I'll show you that we did some testing to look at this is pointing out that in the section 4 of the air travel standard is the specification of a chair that meets air travel standards, that it will reduce in height either by the backrest folding or removing, or the chair tilting or reclining in some way. Next slide. So that would enable the chair, you know, if in this case the chair is tilted, so that it would enable the chair to go into the aircraft. Some chair users are very reluctant to do this because it does potentially put the seating system into more fragile configuration, that if that's used to lift the chair, it could easily damage and break the seating system. Go ahead. So basically, when power chair is laid on its side, the drive wheel is not necessarily flat, and the edge of the wheel gets loaded. And so our hypothesis is that the weight of the drive wheel is what's fracturing the wheel. So to try to validate the hypothesis, we set up a powered wheelchair on its side so that it loaded the side of the wheel. And next slide. We found that the wheel broke at 560 cycles. We were doing a half inch or a 2-inch drop on that. And one of the spokes of the chair actually completely then broke through after it cracked with more cycles. You can go and show, I think we have some slides showing that. So here it is in a drop tester where we're lifting and dropping the entire platform that the wheelchair is laying on. Go ahead and advance. And you can see the fracture in the spoke, and you can go ahead, Ben. So it fractures through the composite wheel in this particular case. And go ahead. So we came up with the idea of putting a pad on the drive hub. Let's just show it. Good. That would Velcro onto the wheel. We just made an foam, packing foam pad that would basically concentrate the weight onto the hub of the drive wheel instead of out at the edge of the wheel. So we can, next slide, you'll see the chair on its side. And so you can see it's loading the center of the wheel with the pad there. And so we repeat the testing. Go ahead to the next slide. And you can see that, can you go back up one, please? It shows how the weight's being concentrated on the center hub of the wheel. So we can go ahead and go to the next slide here. So we dropped the 5,500 cycles with the 800 cycles at 2-inch drop, and then the remaining cycles at a 3-inch drop. And there was no breakage that occurred when we did the drop testing in that configuration. So I think we have another, okay, so this shows just how it was set up with the pad on there. And so I just wanted to show this proof of concept. We're using a felt pad there and then a furniture slider to make it easier to slide the chair laying on its side. And Mr. Thomas is a powered wheelchair user. He's president of the Paralyzed Veterans of America, and he travels a lot. So he's been traveling with this drive pad on his chair, and basically the chair can be tipped on the side, and it's going to concentrate the weight on the drive pad. And he said so far it's been working. You know, he hasn't had any damage to his wheelchair. He actually is fine with his would prefer that his chair be tilted rather than putting the recline mechanism all the way back on his chair. So he's a test case of one, and in our testing we've done, I just wanted to share it to see if anybody has any thoughts or ideas about it. But it seems to be a potential prevention of damage type solution. So go ahead. Obviously, there could be more testing on this to make sure the system works, and we don't really know what the kind of load that a chair receives in the baggage area of an aircraft traveling in this manner. So can you tell me how much more time you wanted me to talk based to before the next speaker?
Yeah, so I think we do have like at least 10 more minutes if you want, because our meeting ends at like 1:30, so in that an hour.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, so let's move on to the next session here, Ben. So we did some research on passenger travel. We had brought in manual wheelchair users and powered wheelchair users, and we did a project with people transferring in and out of different boarding chairs and looking at seating pressures and how well they could transfer in and out of these devices. So if we could just go right into this. These are some of the issues that we identified that are problems for air travel. And so for those of you that are designers, maybe this will give you some ideas of projects that you could work on. The steep jetway slopes, unstable boarding devices, narrow aircraft aisleways, the hazardous transfers that have to occur, the hazardous seating pressures on the boarding devices and the aircraft seats, and lack of accessible lavatories, damage to the mobility devices, and another one that we added on was hazardous onboard wheelchairs, that there don't seem to be any current standards for these are the wheelchairs that fold up and that are required to be carried on on aircraft that have 100 passengers or more, I think is the number. And so any aircraft with like 3-3 seating on each side of the aisle typically has one of these little tiny onboard wheelchairs somewhere folded up in the aircraft. Go ahead. So the steep jetways adjust to whatever height the aircraft is at. The terminals tend to get built really tall because they want the trucks to be able to drive underneath them. And so you have a really tall terminal building, and then you have sometimes smaller aircraft. And so the smaller the aircraft is and the taller the terminal is, the steeper the jetway. And usually the actual jetway area outside the aircraft door is also tilted. So fortunately, if that area was flat, that would be a huge improvement, but currently it's at the same slope as the jetway. Moving on, we'll skip the text slides here. Looking at the process you go through the board here, I'm going down a pretty steep jetway. I'm in a wheelie, balanced on my rear wheels, and there's these steep sections that occur between the sections of the jetway. Moving on to the next slide. So there's the jetway area, which is tilted, and this is where the transfers usually take to go into the aircraft and where the wheelchair gets prepared for being stored underneath the aircraft. Next slide. So here I'm transferring onto a boarding device. I use a manual wheelchair with a fixed front end, and I'm not able to sit on a boarding device without a cushion, so I've placed a secondary cushion that I'm carrying onto the boarding device, and transferring onto that boarding device. I try to make sure I'm transferring in a way that I'm not going to tip over. There's someone holding on the boarding chair and someone holding onto my wheelchair. Next slide. So again, these slopes can be 6 to 14 degrees is what I've measured. There's a lot of people that have fallen over in these boarding devices or fallen over in the boarding device. Go ahead. Let's skip all the title slides, Ben. We're just gonna have to zip through this stuff pretty quickly. So this is just a couple of images of some boarding devices. You can see how narrow they are. The aircraft aisles are allowed to be a minimum of 15 inches wide down to the floor of the aircraft. That's the FAA regulation in the United States. That regulation was set in the 1950s. And so that means that the boarding device, to get down a 15-inch aisle, has to be like 13 or 13 and a half inches wide. And so that makes these devices extremely narrow. Next slide. You can see at most boarding devices, the armrest is here providing some lateral stability. The foot support is pretty poor to accommodate this gentleman. So I usually try to get them to pull me through backwards because the feet don't stay on the boarding device, and that way at least my feet are just dragging out in front of the boarding device if it's going backwards. If my feet are falling off and it being pushed forward, I'm going to be more likely to be injured on my feet. So this, you can see what it looks like with somebody sitting on the boarding device, these straps that are designed to keep that person attached to the boarding device and to keep them falling over, and then trying to tuck those feet in there to be on the boarding device. Next slide. So we measured the lateral tipping angles on some of these boarding devices. You can see this is not a very significant angle, but these devices are loaded with a test mannequin or a subject, and they're at their actual tipping angle. These are the two of the most common boarding devices on the left there, and then there's an overhead lift called the Eagle there on the right. Next slide. So this is the the tipping angle. You can see the standard ramp angle there at the 4.7 degrees. So we're tipping, just over 6, less than 7 degrees of slope. And so when you're on a really, really narrow boarding device in the jetway, it can fall over. Next slide. So if you see the situation here, you can see that the boarding device, the people in the United States, there are contractors that operate the boarding devices to assist people, and they want to position that boarding device so that they can just back up straight into the aircraft. So they've got this thing sideways, exactly the perfect orientation to fall over in the downhill direction. Next slide. So this here you see the person on the boarding device with the straps across them, and if you let go, the chair is going to just literally fall over. So you're completely dependent upon that operator actually holding on to that boarding device at all times. So I always insist that the boarding device be placed facing uphill, up the jetway, so that when I'm transferring onto it, it's not going to be as likely to tip in the lateral direction. And if it was facing downhill, I'd be more likely to fall out of it. So I have them pointed in the uphill direction to make the transfer. Next slide. To go down the aisle, if there's an insistence to move down the aisle in the forward direction, I insist that somebody hold my feet up off the ground, because your toes can catch on the seats, your feet can fall off and get run over. And so the only solution is to actually have somebody hold your feet while you're rolling down the aisle. Next slide. The other issue is here you can see that requirement for the 15 inches. So basically the aisle has to be 20 inches wide, but only to above 25 inches. So they correctly perceived that 20 inches was needed for the hips of a American adult. Well, this was actually back in the 50s as well. So hips can be wider than 20 inches at this point. And we have so much obesity in our country, and people are much larger, but that 20 inches is required, and that 25 inches is above the armrest. So there's an assumption that since there's just legs walking and feet walking down in the lower area, that it only needs to be 15 inches wide down lower and wider up higher. However, in the next slide, you'll see if somebody's sitting down in between those armrests, you can see where the 15 inches becomes an extreme problem for somebody sitting on a boarding device, because it's literally going to be sort of ripping at your clothing and your hips, tearing at you, because most people have hip widths that are wider than 15 inches. And that's actually, that measurement is on commuter aircraft, have that 15-inch spacing. Most 3-3 seating on commercial aircraft actually have about 18 inches, but it's a real problem that the fact that you're trying to push somebody in a seated position down a 15-inch space. Next slide. So I'm going to go. So there are some air carriers that don't have first-class service, so a lot of wheelchair users prefer to fly on Southwest Airlines and other air carriers that don't have 2 classes of seating, so basically coach seating throughout the entire aircraft. And then if you pre-board, you can usually get your wheelchair into the front seating area of the aircraft and transfer right into that coach seating, which makes it a lot easier, and you don't have to get pushed down the narrow aisle. Next slide. So another problem is that the front seats typically don't always have armrests that fold up, because the lap tray or the tray table is stored inside the armrest of the of the chair, and so that makes it a problem to make the transfer. Next slide. So one way of getting around the boarding chair is if you have a wheelchair that converts into a boarding device. I know Rory Cooper and I both have wheelchairs where we can pull our rear wheels off and set down on some narrower wheels. I think those are called transit chairs. I saw them on in the catalog for online for KI Mobility. I saw that they offer transit wheels for their wheelchairs that you can attach underneath the chair like that. Then you can pull yourself down the aisle, but you still got to be sitting in a wheelchair that's extremely narrow to do that. The caster barrels in the front are usually the widest part, and some of the aircraft seating is even getting narrower, and so I can't even always get down the aisle in this situation. Next slide. So the transfers, let's talk about the transfers a minute. So this gal probably actually weighs less than 100 pounds. So in theory, these two flight officers are potentially lifting 50 pounds or less each to transfer her in a very awkward position, as you note, because aircraft are pretty tight spaces. But most people aren't that lightweight, and so when they're going to do that transfer, those operators that are assisting with transfer are lifting very heavy loads, risking injury to themselves and injury to the wheelchair user if they don't properly clear, if they scrape the wheels or whatever, transferring in and out of the chair. Next slide. Keep going. We're going to skip these slides with the wheel braking.
Sorry, the PowerPoint just skipped behind here. I don't know.
You're in the wrong presentation.
Yep.
So another thing that I experimented with was using one of these clamps to grab onto the overhead and provide a strap for transferring. So I clamp the clamp on there, and I reach my hand in there and do the transfer in the next slide. So it provides me with a way to have an overhead strap to assist with the transfer. There are lifting devices that you can purchase to receive assistance from somebody that potentially less chance of being injured in that manual transfer. We also tried another concept out where you did open both overheads and put a track overhead and use a battery powered lift to lift the person and slide them over and set them down in the aircraft seat. But there is a solution that's commercially available. Qantas Airlines commissioned a lift company to build a lift that would go down the aircraft aisle and takes less than 5 minutes to use. So it lifts up the user using a sling out of their powered wheelchair and turns them in the direction of the device. And the device has an outrigger that stays wide in the jetway area. And then when it gets into the gallery area, it gets narrower and has to get very narrow to go down the aisle. But notice that the system is actually lifting the passenger above the height of the armrest. So going down the aisle, it's suspending the person, and this basically this little miniature overhead gantry, spinning them up over the height of the armrest. And then when it gets to the seat, it can lengthen its wheelbase and then set the passenger down in the seat by moving laterally over the seat, and then can be rolled back off the aircraft. So here it is positioned laterally over a seat to set the passenger down in that seat. So I strongly believe that overhead lifts should be required, just like they're required at swimming pools and jacuzzis in the United States, that overhead lifts should be available for lifting people in and out of the seats on aircraft travel. And this product is commercially available to be provided. All Qantas destinations have these overhead lifts. It's called the Eagle, and there's quite a fair number of airports in the United States that actually have some of these lifting devices. Next slide. So hazardous sitting pressures. So this is me actually sitting on my normal Roho seat cushion and the pressures. And then if I sit on a boarding device, these are the sitting pressures that occur if I'm sitting on the boarding device. So that's why I refuse to sit on a boarding device without some type of seat cushion. This is actually the sitting pressure in a commercial aircraft seat without an additional cushion. So I also refuse to sit in aircraft seats without cushions. So I put my other wheelchair cushion on there, and then when I do that, my feet are dangling, my head support's pushing my shoulders forward. It's just not very comfortable. So I carry a bunch of extra stuff that's shown here. I'll use a inflatable pillow as a lumbar support. I'll use a down vest stuffed into itself to spine support. I'll use a neck support. I'll use my backpack as a foot support. I'll use a rolled up towel as my arm support. So then when I sit in that, I can actually sit reasonably comfortable in an aircraft seat. But that's the stuff that I haul around with me to sit somewhat comfortably in a normal aircraft seat. There are some commercially available things available. We've found and tested this device that straps around the back of the chair with some lateral supports to provide some positioning. And this particular device is also available that we found. And the next is the bathrooms. Of course, they're horribly not accessible on aircraft. And even if you can get in the aircraft onboard wheelchair to get to it, you're not going to have a lot of privacy, and you're going to have assistance to access the not very accessible lavatories on aircraft. There are some aircraft designs that are being developed. You can step through these slowly that convert two bathrooms into one larger bathroom. And I tried this out on the newest 777 had a bathroom like that I tried on during COVID. I think it was that aircraft showed up in Washington, D.C. to evacuate us out of Washington, D.C. So that's another problem area. And going on to the next.
We covered damage last time, so.
Yeah, so we'll skip these slides. Heather Ansley, the attorney at PVA, is responsible for filing suit against the FAA to require data to be disclosed on the number of wheelchair mishandlings that occur. So I think we're out of time at this point, and so I think our other things that we can talk about in the future, if you can just show a couple of slides, Ben, is just the feasibility of providing technical feasibility of providing a place on an aircraft the wheelchair can park in, and these just few slides here show how that concept would work, that you come in and have a space that you could pivot around in and be secured in to come in at the front of the aircraft. And I think it shows next the plate that comes out, and keep moving through the slides here, please, Ben. So the plate, I want to show the plate. There we go. So the idea is that the seats attach to the two tracks. So you can take out 2 rows of seats to attach a pallet that would have a securement system on it for securing the wheelchair user. I don't know if we show the wheelchair securement in another slide. Do we show that, Ben?
Yes, we do. Sorry, PowerPoint needs to skip around here. Kind of, there's no plate there, but it shows a securement.
So there's the securement position, and you can see that because of the pitch of the seats being so close together, that 2 rows of seats actually have to be removed to provide that place for securement. So that's all I have. That's a report that's available from the National Academy of Science on the technical feasibility. I think we could just show those slides with the crash position, Ben, at the end of this little short presentation. So the crash testing for aircraft seating is done at a 60-degree angle because the loads are mostly downward. And so there's, I think, the next step in the feasibility of this wheelchairs on aircraft scenario is to test more powered wheelchairs in this crash orientation to see how well they pass since they've all done the crash testing on a level test sled, but now they have to do this testing in the aircraft orientation to see if the wheelchair will survive the crash test orientation. So I don't know if there's time for any questions, but I'd be happy to answer any if there is time for a question or two.
I just wanted to first say thank you for the presentation. You covered a lot of great, interesting topics, and also thanks for sharing your own experience by providing photos and comments.
Yeah. Yeah, I've got a couple million miles of air travel experience of myself. I've had my wheelchair left and lost and broken, and that's just a manual wheelchair. So I usually insist on in the United States, if you board first, you're allowed to store one wheelchair inside the aircraft in the closet. And my wheelchair is actually small enough. It's a folding type wheelchair that folds side to side. And so with all 6 wheels, quick release wheels, I can fit my wheelchair in the overhead or in the closet to travel on board the aircraft.
I don't know if anyone else has any questions.
I'd like to make a comment. As a wheelchair user myself, and also a paraplegic using a manual chair, pretty much completely agree with Peter's analysis of how that all plays out. And I don't have exactly the same needs as Peter, but it's effectively the same thing. And I will add that to me, I'm always shocked that literally when I first started, flying in '84 as a wheelchair user, it's literally the same experience, which is kind of mind blowing to me. The aisle chair has not changed. There's always one trainee who doesn't know what's going on. The straps are always haphazard, and nobody seems to figure out how to put them on. For some strange reason, the people don't seem to know how to raise the arms, which of course they should. This should not be a big secret, but
Yeah, some of the flight attendants know how to raise the arms.
Right. When you go to transfer again, it's on a, like he said, it's on a slant. They always put the chair directly parallel to me, and I say, don't put it there, and I move. And once I move, then they put it again parallel to me. So we play this dance for a while until I get them to say, just hold this thing. And again, I'm literally shocked because this is what they do, right? So how is it that if this is your job, you don't get it? Because this is really not rocket science. So, yeah, I'm going to just say that, yeah, I think you did a great job and pretty much nailed what's going on.
Yeah, the next section of the air travel standard that we're going to be working on is actually covers some of the procedures and the training that should be required for people assisting with the boarding and unboarding process.
That would be very useful.
Can I just ask a question? I'd heard that in America, in the States, there was a new plan for people to be able to take their own chairs in and strap them down in the airplanes.
Yeah, that's what I just showed, and I showed that in the last section of the slide.
But is that going to be in all planes or just in the States?
Well, it's being evaluated in the United States. So if the technology becomes available, some of those aircraft probably fly to other countries. So, the only way it would be required is if all air carriers are required to do it, then they would all have to comply with providing that type of accessibility. But we had aircraft seat manufacturers, we had aircraft interior designers, and we had wheelchair experts, Rory Cooper and myself, and a powered wheelchair user. And so we've shown that it's technically feasible, and so now we gave that report to Congress, and so I think that funding is being identified to do research to see what the next steps are, and one of the next steps is to verify that wheelchairs can withstand the crash testing. And we're seeing some aircraft manufacturers and airlines come up with different concepts for how they could make a way for wheelchairs to park in the aircraft. And so we know that it's technically feasible. The issue is, just like the bathrooms, it's technically feasible to make a larger bathroom, but most aircraft aren't ordering them. And I think that the requirement for accessible bathrooms is way out in the future, that it will be required to have a larger bathroom, but they haven't defined what the accessible bathroom looks like very well yet.
No, I just asked because so often traveling in Africa that you don't have the roll-on facility, so the angle of that ramp, and it's not really relevant. You often have a separate vehicle that can drive up beside the plane and then sort of raise you up to the door.
Some of them have a vehicle that lifts up to the back door, and they'll load you in the back door of the aircraft. So we did look at the feasibility of making the wheelchair parking space at the back of the aircraft as well as at the front of the aircraft.
Okay.
That's in the report. That's also shown in the report that wheelchair seating could be provided at near the rear door or near the front door of the aircraft.
Well, thank you, Peter and Ben, for your presentation. I think that we're going to move with Matt because he's also going to introduce a new topic, and you may be interested and have some questions on this too.
Thank you. How much time do we have? What are we looking at?
Like 30 minutes total.
Okay. I'm going to share my screen here. And it should be on there, on your screen. Is it sharing on your side?
Yeah, it's looking good.
So I just want to introduce myself and a lot of the work that I'm doing right now with respect to training technicians, both in the United States and Canada, but then also internationally in the last 2 years. But to kind of understand where I'm working today, I'm going to go over a little bit of my background and where I started in the industry. So let's see here. Should be able to move. It's not letting me move. Okay, there we go. So I started in the industry in 2000 in Vancouver, British Columbia, Canada, where I'm from originally. And I started as a DME CRT repair technician. And when I started in the company that I was working in Vancouver, there was no technicians. They had lost the current technicians that they had. So a lot of my work was, throw me in a repair shop and told me to repair equipment and figure it out as I went along. And that's kind of the kind of learning environment that a lot of technicians have to go through, which I learned later is definitely something that needs to be improved. In 2002, I aided in developing a repurposing program for Veterans Affairs of Canada. And during this process, there was an intent to take durable medical equipment and complex rehab technology equipment and repurpose it from veterans that had no longer needed the equipment, had AT abandonment, or had passed away, and they were trying to refurbish equipment that was still appropriate for reuse. So part of my job was assigning what the procedures were for evaluating equipment. And the next step was I started teaching PT and OT students on maintaining medical equipment, so how to maintain equipment in long-term care settings, but then also in the school setting for adjustments for seating and positioning devices being added on to medical equipment, mostly manual and powered wheelchairs. In 2008, I ended up moving to the United States and began working with a DME company in Portland, Oregon, where I actually have 5 children that live there currently now. That's where I'm based out of now, some almost 18 years later. And over the course of that period of time, I did finally get my ATP, as Canada wasn't recognizing their ATPs at the time because it's a US-based certification. I was able to get my ATP working as an ATP in the area, but then also working with different colleges, similarly with PTs and OTs, in maintaining and refurbishing medical equipment in long-term care. A lot of times what we're finding in skilled facilities is they can't get funding, so the therapists are trying to make equipment last as long as possible. So a lot of my classes were, how do you identify a cable that needs to be broken or adjusted on tilt space wheelchairs and walkers, and there was just a lot of common maintenance that needed to be taught. So that was a lot of the classes that I had made up until that point. And it wasn't until 2013, I ended up leaving the company that I was with and started my own consulting business. And the first project that I was working on was a VA program, looking at consulting ATP services to be able to provide new equipment to veterans through almost a consulting basis. A lot of the VA uses their own orthotics and prosthetics departments, so they don't get the skills of the ATPs. They end up having to bypass that. So my job was creating a program that would work within Oregon and Washington for the VAs to use ATP consulting. And the next was I was approached by a couple different areas in the rural portions of Oregon and Washington that weren't able to access seating clinics. And they were referring out to the larger cities, but then you have displacement of individuals needing repairs for CRT. So if somebody's needing complex equipment, they go to Portland, Oregon from Bend or Eugene, that's 4 hours away. They get complex rehab from the provider that's there, but then they go back home. And so there's no continuity of care from the dealer side. So the repairs of the equipment end up getting left to either the dealers that are local that maybe don't have the expertise, or trying to get people from Portland to travel 4 hours away to do a service call, which is not functional for the end user. So I ended up aiding in setting up seating clinics in rural areas, pulling the therapy teams that were in those areas to try to identify skills within the therapy teams that existed to bring more service locally rather than displacing those individuals. And then in 2014, I actually started launching my own DME certification repair training program. And I developed a college program through a community college that was pre-employment for individuals that had mechanical aptitude to take a training program to become a certified repair technician for DME and CRT. And this process led me to a program with the state of Oregon. The state of Oregon was looking at repurposing durable medical equipment, again, similar to the VA program, where they had individuals that no longer needed the equipment, but they wanted to be able to safely repurpose it for other members. And it was at this time that I ended up helping them develop a program. But one of the areas we didn't have in the previous program that I developed with the Veterans Affairs of Canada, which I'll cover in a little bit later, was training, good training. So part of my focus at this time was developing the certification process for repair technicians that are repairing medical equipment within our industry. And it was at this time, 2014, 2015, that I started the DMERC Group, which was a not-for-profit entity similar to RESNA. Its goal was to design the scope of requirements for technicians. So what is their expected role and duties to be able to carry out a repair efficiently. And this was a collaborative effort between stakeholders in the United States and in Canada. And the development of this nonprofit was to standardize education, standardize training, standardize testing requirements for technicians so that there was actually some credibility and validation of their skills. And then we also launched the state reuse program within Oregon in 2015. Moving forward, a couple years later, I helped develop a national program for live hands-on technical training for technicians that supplemented our online learning for the examinations, national examinations we made through the DMERC group. And a lot of this was focused in the United States for a lot of our examinations. Now Canada's picking it up, but we focused a lot on the US marketplace for about 3 years. In 2018, I ended up developing the first international course. This was for ISS Canada, and this was a collaborative technical training with all the major manufacturers between Canada and the United States, but obviously open for anybody that was flying internationally. And this was the first introduction I had with New Zealand and Australia looking for similar requirements and standards. We launched the practical examinations for the DMERC group at this time, which was a follow-up to the online courses. Technicians, because we do a lot of live hands-on training, there's a lot of mechanical aptitude that goes into their skills. There has to be a live hands-on evaluation of their skills. Online exams just aren't sufficient for that. So we created the live examinations that were nationally developed and launched at that time. After that, we aided in developing a new ATP pathway with RESNA. It's called the ATP Apprenticeship Program that they're hoping to launch this year. And this is a pathway from the DMERT certified technicians to be able to continue their career into being an assistive technology professional. Again, this is US based, so this is a program specifically for the United States. And recently in 2023, we expanded the DMERT group certification to New Zealand as the national standard for certification of medical equipment technicians. And we are now expanding into Australia currently this year for 2024. Similarly, the full certification for national acceptance with a goal of international partnerships outside of Asia Pacific. We feel like there's a strong need for standards in training technicians holistically worldwide. And as we know, manufacturers that are working in Asia Pacific and the United States and Canada are focused on standardized skills. So utilizing the same programs for Europe and beyond is definitely a goal that we have for inclusion of these skills. And as this pertains to a project I'm working on right now, I'm currently working on a international reuse standard for durable medical equipment. So how do we look at standardizing repair of equipment that is going to be repurposed rather than just repaired for the same individual user? And through this process, we're evaluating kind of the skills and metrics that are required to be able to take an equipment, appropriately evaluate the equipment for reuse, actually repair the equipment, and then dispense this equipment. So there's some main categories that we have to focus on when we look at reuse, which is there a global need for this standard? I believe there is a global need for the standard. There's a number of entities that I'm aware of that are repurposing medical equipment from the United States that they refurbish and then ship to lower resource settings to be able to access equipment and AT that might be needed, with the goal of aiding and providing equipment. But our biggest struggle is this being repaired efficiently? Are they choosing appropriate equipment to be repurposed? Is it being repurposed to an appropriate standard of efficiency? Or are we finding that there's AT abandonment, there's collection of equipment not being utilized due to either poor maintenance, poor repair, or just poor selection of equipment? So some of these areas that I've identified holistically, internationally, is definitely one of the areas we want to be looking at in creating some sort of standard. Personalized training. So how do we raise the bar as far as the skills that are available to individuals? So are they having access to be able to repair equipment when it is being dispensed to lower resource settings? A lot of what feedback I hear from different groups that are providing equipment is they provide the equipment, it breaks, and then it gets tossed, and then they get a new piece of equipment if there's no access to appropriate tools or skills to be able to maintain it. So raising the bar of available tools, both from a maintenance side, but then also to basic repair is definitely something that we want to encourage, is access to building skills. Potential benefits of some sort of standard is we can help identify what equipment is being sourced and collected, how they're collecting equipment, how they're collecting parts. So if they're sourcing parts that are appropriate to be reused on medical equipment, what kind of standards are being followed. A lot of this can have a drastic impact in equipment being utilized appropriately, lack of AT abandonment for ill-fitting or ill-equipped repairs, and then also hopefully lower costs if we're not having to replace it as often with some additional skills. And then metrics as far as what we hope to achieve on the outside for kind of data collection is who is actually dispensing equipment, who's following guidelines that are sourcing equipment appropriately, are they repurposing equipment that was originally ISO tested so that there's some standard that they can fall on, or is this unregulated equipment? A lot of that is information that we don't have perfect answers on. That would be great to have a better understanding of what's being dispensed and how they're appropriately reusing that medical equipment. So when we look at kind of the three pillars of repurposing medical equipment, there's procedure, which is how am I collecting the equipment? So what the selection of the equipment actually is. Are we taking, bath equipment? Are we taking, this kind of walker versus that kind of walker? So selecting the equipment and then identifying how you can repair equipment. So what areas of this particular AT can be serviced and should be serviced versus areas that should not be. So, should we re-weld a manual wheelchair? These types of questions are on the procedure side. So what scope is this program going to entail? And this was an area that I explored with the Canadian VA program in 2002, was we created a procedure of equipment. And then the next piece that we created was oversight. So once equipment has been selected, what is the process to service? What is the process to then deliver? And that oversight is unlike manufacturing. When you have manufacturing and you have ISO testing, you can test a batch, a particular product out of a batch, and assign that because there's consistency in how each area is being manufactured, that 1 unit out of 100 or 1 unit out of 1,000 is appropriate. But because we have individual skill levels of people repairing equipment, the oversight and the procedure are much more important because the variables of human interaction increases. So there has to be more oversight development. But then the area that we didn't identify when we were looking at the VA program back in 2002 that I implemented in the program in 2014 with the state of Oregon was training, formal, appropriate training. And this is if we have a procedure of what needs to be serviced and we have oversight of how to service it, there has to be an identified requirement of skill of the individual to be able to perform this task. As an example, I met with a national US DME provider of complex rehab, and they have good procedures and good oversight. And we had an argument, not an argument, but a discussion about training. And their question was, well, I have this sheet that has 14 different items of what needs to be serviced on this task list. Is this not sufficient to say that it was repaired appropriately? And my question as I went down the list is, okay, so it says make sure that the caster journal is intact. What training does this individual have that shows what an intact caster journal looks like versus an inattached or incorrect caster journal? So what is the correct measurement tool of what things should be, and does that person have the identified skills to put it to the place that it should be? And so the skill requirement of the person carrying out the procedure is as important as the procedure itself. So as we developed this formal training program, this was married with procedure and oversight to create an actual repurposing program that had appropriate standards for state use, for the state programs. So as we're looking at, what do we need to do internationally, the areas that we're working on is identifying levels of skills, and then how do we implement levels of skills within procedure and oversight. The level 1 DEMERT certification program has 3 sections. And in section 1, we have manual equipment foundations, walker repair, manual wheelchair repair, and tilt and space repairs. And these focus mainly on manual equipment. When we get into section 2 and 3, we look at power items. And as we've worked with low resource settings, what we found is in New Zealand, Australia, where they have access to powered equipment, they're doing the full level 1 certification for qualified individuals to be able to repair equipment. But when we look at lower resource settings, they have less access to powered mobility and less access to lift chairs and hospital beds and a lot of the other extras we tend to have in, Asia Pacific and in the United States. So we looked at focusing on pulling from section 1 and creating a manual wheelchair certification program. So just on manual equipment. So that would be manual wheelchairs, rollators, walkers, and then tilt and space wheelchairs and reclining wheelchairs. So we would focus on manual equipment only and have some sort of scope that these technicians are having to carry out when we're looking at areas that just have access to this manual equipment. And lastly, the next steps for us as a group is we're refining the scope of this project for international use. So what does it look like on a global scale? How do we identify providing these skills for both procedure, skill, and then oversight? Time frame of the project, we're working on how long we want to set this project out before we were trying to have some sort of guidelines for it. Developing the rollout for this implementation of the standard and then executing international guidelines. Definitely ISWP is an area that I've wanted to aid in trying to get some support for international standards within this area. I feel like that's a very good place for this support. And Alex and I have talked a few times about, how ISWP may be able to support or have individuals that are interested in volunteering to participate in helping develop these guidelines. But with current state of AT, there's definitely an acknowledgement of concern of AT being reused without appropriate international standards for reuse. So I feel like this is definitely a large topic to cover, but also a very needed topic to identify some positive outcomes. So I kept it as brief as I could to leave some time for some questions. If there's any questions on what we're doing and what we hope to achieve and anything else, please feel free to chime in, and I can stop sharing now.
Thanks, Matt. Again, a very great presentation, and I think the resources that you shared are very useful also for what it's going to become in the future. I think that I have a question for you in terms of how you're going to develop the resources that are going to be part of the training for low and middle income settings.
Yeah.
Are you considering about including manufacturers for those products that are available in these settings?
So all of the training that I've built has already been collaborative with most major manufacturers within Asia Pacific and the United States and Canada. So if there's additional manufacturers outside of those areas that are interested in participating, that's definitely encouraged. So my goal is inclusion of as many individuals that are stakeholders and having positive outcomes. The last thing we want to do is make something that's not going to be appropriate for some manufacturers. However, we do have, I think, a fairly strong requirement that it has to follow ISO guidelines to be repurposed, because if there's no standards prior to manufacturing for delivery, it's really hard to repurpose to some sort of standard. So ISO tested manufacturing is definitely going to be, I think, one of the key factors there.
Okay, so if I got that right, it would be wheelchairs that have passed the ISO testing, those that you can. Okay, so yeah, I know that I think there are even some manufacturers in the group that have passed their ISO testing, but they may not be in the US market.
Yeah, so they're definitely encouraged to participate as we're making these guidelines to ensure that they're going to have a voice in, how it works and rolls out.
I think we were told by one, I think we were contacted by one organization that does refurbishing of wheelchairs that indicated that the FDA wanted to see a test report on a chair that had been refurbished to see how well the chair had was able to survive the testing after the refurbishment had taken place, and then it was like, well, how would we choose which chair we were going to test? And there was no.
Yeah, I'm not sure if it's the same group, but I've heard from my groups that I'm working with the same thing. And it's like you can't ISO test a random product from an area that is variable in how it's being repaired, especially the groups that I'm working with. There's 9 different facilities that repurpose in the United States. So you're going to test one from each place, and are you going to test one product from each category of the products that they repurpose? There's no consistency in the repair to be able to justify the testing of one unit. That's the problem. So like you're saying, it's not the solution. Doing ISO testing post repurposing is not something that's going to identify that safety.
But I mean, it would give you an indication of some data is better than zero data.
And it is good for the purpose of research, but not for the purpose of approving a container of equipment when multiple sites are repairing equipment, and there's no specific procedure that they've repaired all of the equipment to the same standard of that piece of equipment being tested. So once there's procedure and oversight and skill, and then testing, then it validates the procedure, but you have to have formal procedures and skills and testing at each place to ensure that it's the consistent equivalent to the equipment that was tested.
Right, but I'm a pilot and I'm an aircraft mechanic as well. So, there's aircraft that we're flying are 40, 50 years old, and they're completely airworthy because you make visual inspections on how things should look and how things should function. And so, the issue is if you have parts that have worn out and there's no structural deformation in the frame anywhere.
Yep.
You know that you're adequately doing your job, but it's based on a combination of written and functional tests that you verify a mechanic has the abilities to know to refurbish a part or refurbish an entire aircraft for that matter, and know that each part is in working order.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the procedure we're talking about that doesn't exist in a holistic sense from one repurposing company to another or one facility to another, is that consistency.
So have you been able to successfully show that you've been able to train somebody that has, that's been capable of refurbishing the parts? Have you been able to visually do that?
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay.
Yep.
That's great.
So it's a big project, but any help that we can get from any manufacturing group or other stakeholders is definitely welcome and desired, so we have more inclusion.
Matt, that sounds great to have such a sort of more standardized approach to it, and especially from an international point of view. Is this level 1 DMERT certification program sort of focused around get the reuse of products, or
it's focused on maintaining and repairing equipment regardless of whether it's being repaired to an existing user or repurposed to a new user?
Yeah, great. Because that's where we see a massive need, is that for wheelchair service staff to have that in-house capacity to really deal with a lot of the basic maintenance and repair and servicing. And for us, it really fits in as well in the whole strategy of accessing spare parts that manufacturers should be providing wheelchair services, and that whole sort of supply chain issue around that, which no one's really trying to push and deal with on a long-term basis. And so we could be really interested in participating in that, because that's something that whole that sort of basic level manual wheelchair repair and maintenance sort of training is something that we want to be able to deliver to our wheelchair service partners. And if there is a more standardized international approach, I think it makes it more interesting from a funder point of view as well, to sort of buy into that.
Well, and sustainability of workforce. I mean, we're looking at having a certificate or a certification is definitely beneficial for building a skill within like a career program. Within the United States and Canada, 90% of those that are taking the certification are working for DME companies repairing equipment for existing users, not repurposing equipment. Repurposing within the United States is liability heavy, so a lot of repurposing is being shipped outside of the United States. There's not a lot being reused. Other than the programs that I've identified that I've helped create, there's not a lot of reuse within the United States. It's very, they might repurpose, but a lot of it is shipped overseas just because of liability and risk, because there wasn't a formal process. And that's what's really needed is formal education, formal process, oversight. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think for that long-term sustainability, we've seen talking to different organizations and ministries of health is at some point, if that standard, that certification can be kind of become a government post.
Right.
So, right, you have a occupational therapist, physiotherapist, or a assistive product repair technician becomes a government post, then you're more likely to get it based into the sort of government medical system, and then it sort of frees up sort of governments to sort of fund those posts.
Yeah.
But I think that sounds great. I'd love to be involved in that. I think I'll contact you separately.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Thank you, Matt, and thank you everyone for staying with us. I know some people had to leave. I'm going to be posting the recording after I receive the processing and everything. So it's going to be on YouTube and it's going to be on the website. Not sure if it's going to be on the new one because some changes are happening, but once we have the new version, then I'll post it there too. Thank you again and see you in 3 months.
Yeah. Thank you guys.
Bye.